You're not enough. Those three words, spoken loud enough for an entire restaurant to hear, would shatter one woman's heart and awaken something fierce in a single father who had been teaching his 7-year-old son about dinosaurs just 3 tables away. What happened next in that cozy Seattle restaurant on a Friday evening in late October wasn't planned. It wasn't heroic. It was simply a choice, one that would change 3 lives forever and prove that sometimes the most broken moments create the most beautiful beginnings. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The copper kettle smelled like garlic bread and caramelized onions. Collins Dawson sat across from his son Levi in their usual corner booth, watching the boy color a T-Rex with intense concentration, his tongue poking out the side of his mouth the way it always did when he focused. "Dad, do you think dinosaurs had favorite foods?" Levi asked, not looking up from his menu masterpiece. Collins smiled, grateful for the millionth time that he had this kid. "I bet they did, buddy, just like you and your mac and cheese obsession." "It's not an obsession, it's a refined palate." He said the words carefully, clearly repeating something he'd heard from his teacher.
Collins was about to respond when movement near the entrance caught his attention. A man in his late 20s, designer jacket, expensive watch, the kind of guy who checked his reflection on every surface, was seated at a nearby table. The man's expression was impatient, bored. He ordered a drink without looking at the waitress and kept glancing toward the door. Collins recognized that look. Obligation, not anticipation. 10 minutes passed. The man checked his phone 4 times. Collins had turned his attention back to Levi's elaborate plans for his volcano science project when the restaurant door opened again. A young woman with long blonde hair wheeled herself inside, maneuvering a sleek wheelchair with the kind of ease that spoke of years of practice. She was beautiful. Delicate features, nervous smile, dressed carefully for what was clearly an important evening. Collins watched her scan the restaurant, saw the moment her eyes found designer jacket guy. Her whole face lit up. "Trevor, I'm Tiffany. It's so nice to finally—" Collins saw it happen in slow motion. The man's polite, waiting expression didn't just fade, it collapsed. His smile dropped like someone had cut the strings holding it up, replaced with something ugly, disgust. His eyes traveled from her face to her wheelchair and back, his lip actually curling.
"You've got to be kidding me." The words carried across the restaurant. Several diners looked up. Levi stopped coloring. Collins felt his stomach drop. "I'm sorry?" Tiffany's voice was small, confused. Trevor, if that was even his real name, leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like she was something offensive he needed to distance himself from. "Rachel didn't mention this," he gestured at her wheelchair, not even trying to lower his voice. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you because I don't believe in wasting time. This isn't going to work." "I don't understand." But Tiffany did understand. Collins could see it in the way her hands gripped her armrests, knuckles white. "I mean, come on. I'm an active guy. I run marathons. I go hiking every weekend. I need someone who's whole, someone who can actually keep up with me, someone normal." Collins watched Tiffany physically recoil, as if she'd been slapped.
"I'm not incomplete," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You're not enough." Trevor stood abruptly, pulled out his wallet and threw 2 20s on the table. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this. I need a real partner, not a project. You understand, right? It's nothing personal." He walked out, just like that. Left her sitting there, alone, in front of everyone. The silence that followed was devastating. Collins saw other diners look away quickly, uncomfortable. Some whispered behind their menus. A few stared with pity that was almost as bad as Trevor's cruelty. Tiffany sat perfectly still, her face flushed deep red. her eyes glistening with tears she was clearly fighting not to shed. "Dad," Levi's voice was small, distressed. "Why did that man say those mean things? The lady didn't do anything wrong." Something ignited in Colin's chest. For 6 years, he'd worked at Harborview Rehabilitation Center, helping people rebuild their lives after accidents and injuries. He'd held the hands of patients who'd sobbed about being rejected, about being told they were less than, about being defined by what they could no longer do instead of who they were. He'd watched them fight their way back to living, to believing they deserved to take up space in the world. And this woman, this stranger, had just been told in front of a room full of people that she didn't deserve basic human decency. Not on his watch. Collins made a decision that would change everything. "Levi, how would you feel about making a new friend tonight?" His son's face brightened immediately. "Really? Can we help her, Dad?" "Yes, buddy, we can." Colin stood up, his heart pounding. As he walked toward Tiffany's table, he thought about all the patients he'd worked with. The veteran who'd lost his legs in Afghanistan and learned to run again on prosthetics. The teenager paralyzed in a car accident who'd gone on to compete in wheelchair basketball. The grandmother with a stroke who'd fought through a year of therapy to hold her grandchildren again. They were some of the strongest people he'd ever met. And this woman, sitting alone, fighting not to break down in public, was strong too. She just needed someone to see it. "Excuse me?" She didn't look up at first, staring down at her lap, shoulders shaking slightly. "Excuse me?" Collins said again, gently. "I'm Collins. That's my son Levi over there." He waited until she slowly lifted her eyes to his. They were blue, brimming with unshed tears, full of humiliation and hurt. "We couldn't help but see what just happened. And we want you to know that guy was completely wrong. You're not incomplete. You're not a project. And you deserve so much better than that." Tiffany stared at him like she couldn't quite process that this was happening. "We were wondering," Collins continued, crouching down so they were at eye level, "if you'd like to join us for dinner. Levi's 7, and he talks non-stop about dinosaurs, so I apologize in advance. But we'd really enjoy the company." For a long moment, she just looked at him. Collins could see her trying to determine if this was pity, if this was real, if she could trust this unexpected kindness. You don't have to do that," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I don't have to." Collins held her gaze steadily. "I want to." That man was wrong about everything he said. You're complete exactly as you are, and you shouldn't have to sit here alone after what he put you through. He gestured toward their booth, where Levi was half standing, waving enthusiastically with both hands. "Besides," Collins added with a gentle smile, "Levi's already decided you're his friend, and he's very persistent about these things." A single tear escaped, rolling down Tiffany's cheek. But when she smiled, tentative and fragile but real, it transformed her whole face. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you. Thank you so much." As Collins walked beside her chair back to their booth, he was aware of the other diners watching. But this time, their expressions had changed. The elderly couple at the next table nodded approvingly. Their waitress, Dorothy, who'd been working there for years, gave Tiffany's shoulder a gentle squeeze as she passed. Collins wasn't doing this for their approval. He was doing it because it was right, because he wanted Levi to learn that kindness wasn't complicated. It was a choice you made every single day, especially when someone else chose cruelty. "Hi, I'm Levi." His son's announcement was immediate and enthusiastic. "I'm 7 3/4, which is almost 8. That man was really mean to you, and I'm sorry. My dad says some people don't know how to see what's really important." He paused for dramatic effect, then asked the most important question. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Tiffany let out a surprised laugh, genuine and unexpected. The sound seemed to release some of the tension locked in her shoulders. She wiped at her eyes quickly. I'm Tiffany. I'm 25. And thank you, Levi. That's very sweet of you to say. I consider your question seriously. I do like dinosaurs, actually. What's your favorite? Ankylosaurus. Levi launched into an immediate explanation. Because it has armor and a club tail so it could protect itself from T-Rexes and other predators. What's yours? Collins watched as Tiffany visibly relaxed, Levi's innocent enthusiasm creating a safe space where the humiliation of moments ago could begin to fade. I think I'd have to say the pteranodon, she said thoughtfully, because flying seems pretty amazing. Imagine being able to just soar away whenever you wanted. Pteranodons aren't actually dinosaurs, they're pterosaurs, but they're still really cool. And you're right, flying would be awesome.
Levi, Collins said with gentle warning, let's give Tiffany a chance to catch her breath, okay? It's okay, Tiffany said softly, meeting Collins' eyes. Really, this is nice. Thank you. The sincerity in her voice made Collins' chest tighten. Dorothy appeared at the table. What can I get for you, sweetie? She asked Tiffany with particular warmth, pointedly ignoring the empty table where Trevor had been. As they ordered, mac and cheese for Levi, grilled salmon for Tiffany, a burger for Collins, the conversation began to flow more naturally. Tiffany asked about Levi's school, and he launched into an enthusiastic explanation of his volcano science project. And then the baking soda and vinegar make it explode! He demonstrated with wild hand gestures. Dad helped me build it out of clay, but I did all the painting myself. That sounds incredible, Tiffany said. I'd love to see pictures. Collins pulled out his phone, showing her the photos. As she scrolled through them, making genuine comments about Levi's artistic choices, Collins found himself studying her. There was resilience in her eyes, a determination that hadn't been broken by Trevor's cruelty. She'd been knocked down, devastatingly so, but she was choosing to get back up. So, Collins, Tiffany said, handing back his phone, what do you do?
I'm a physical therapist at Harborview Rehabilitation Center. I work mostly with patients recovering from accidents and injuries, helping them regain mobility and independence. Something shifted in Tiffany's expression. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. That must be rewarding work. It is, Collins said honestly. Every day I see people pushing through pain and frustration to reclaim their lives. They're some of the strongest people I've ever met. The emphasis on strongest wasn't lost on Tiffany. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. I had physical therapists after my accident. They saved my life in a lot of ways. Not just physically, but they helped me believe I could still have a life worth living. What happened? Levi asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. Why do you have a wheelchair? Levi, Collins said, but Tiffany shook her head. It's okay. I don't mind. She turned to Levi, her expression open and honest. I was a swimmer in college, a really serious one. I was training to try out for the Olympics. One day during practice, I was diving, and I hit my head on the bottom of the pool. It damaged my spine, and now my legs don't work the way they used to. Collins felt a surge of admiration. She was explaining this to a 7-year-old with grace and honesty. Does it hurt? Levi asked, his young face full of concern.
Sometimes, Tiffany admitted, but I've learned to live with it. I can do most of the things I could do before, just differently. I work as a graphic designer now, creating logos and websites for businesses. I paint. I still swim with my arms at the Adaptive Sports Center. Life looks different than I planned, but it's still mine. That's really cool, Levi said, seriously. You're like a superhero who adapted to new powers. Tiffany blinked. Then she smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed her entire face. You know what? I like that way of thinking about it. Thank you, Levi. As their food arrived and they ate, the conversation continued. Tiffany told them about growing up with 3 older brothers who taught it to be tough and competitive. They never let me win at anything just because I was the youngest or the only girl. I had to earn every victory. After my accident, they were amazing. They built ramps at our parents' house before I even got home from the hospital, but they also didn't let me wallow. They expected me to keep fighting. Do they live nearby? Collins asked. 2 are in Portland, one's in San Francisco. We video chat every Sunday, though. They're very protective. She laughed. If they knew about tonight, they'd probably hunt Trevor down. I'd help. The words came out before he could stop them, and they earned him another smile.
When Levi started yawning into his mac and cheese around 8:30, Collins knew it was time to wrap up. But as he signaled for the check, he found himself not wanting the evening to end. There was something about Tiffany, her strength, her vulnerability, her dry humor, the way she'd engaged with Levi so naturally, that drew him in. If you've ever met someone and felt an instant connection, you know how rare that is, how precious. Collins had felt it only once before, with his ex-wife, and that had ended with a note on the kitchen counter and a 2-year-old who asked for his mommy for 6 months straight. But this felt different, real in a way that first connection hadn't been. "Tiffany," he said, trying to sound casual and completely failing, "I know tonight didn't go the way you planned, but would you maybe want to do this again? Properly, I mean, not as a rescue mission, but as—" He hesitated, then went for honesty. "As a date, a real one, with me." Tiffany studied him for a long moment. Collins could see the war happening behind her eyes. She was questioning his motives, wondering if this was pity. "Why?" she asked, finally, her voice soft but direct. "Is this because you feel sorry for me?"
No, Collins leaned forward, holding her gaze. "It's because in the last 2 hours, I've watched you handle one of the most humiliating situations I can imagine with grace and dignity, because you made my son laugh and took his dinosaur obsession seriously, because you're clearly intelligent, funny, and interesting, and because when you smile, really smile, it's like the whole room gets brighter." He paused, then said the words that mattered most. "Trevor was wrong about everything. You're not incomplete. If anything, I think you might be one of the most complete people I've ever met." Tiffany's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different. Not tears of humiliation, but something else. Hope, maybe. "I'd like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'd really like that, Collins." They exchanged numbers. As Collins lifted a drowsy Levi into his arms, his son mumbled against his shoulder. "I really like her, Dad. She's nice, and she knows that pterosaurs aren't dinosaurs." "I like her too, buddy," he whispered back. As they walked to their car, Collins glanced back through the restaurant window. Tiffany was still at the table, looking at her phone, probably their newly exchanged numbers, with a small, genuine smile on her face. He'd made the right choice tonight. He was certain of that.
3 days later, Collins found himself on the phone with Tiffany on a Monday evening after Levi was in bed. He'd texted her the next morning, unable to wait longer than 12 hours, and they'd been talking ever since. "So, honest question," Tiffany said, her voice carrying a hint of vulnerability. "Why are you single? You're a great dad, you have a good job, you're kind, which apparently is rarer than it should be. What's the story?" Collins had known this question would come eventually. He took a breath. "Levi's mom left when he was 2. We'd been married for 3 years, and I thought we were happy, but she wasn't. She wanted to pursue modeling in Europe. She felt like being a wife and mother was holding her back. One day, I came home from work and found a note on the kitchen counter. She was already on a plane." "Oh, Collins, that's awful." "It was," he admitted. "For a long time, I was angry, not just for me, but for Levi. How do you walk away from your child? But eventually, I realized that anger was just hurting me. She made her choice, and Levi and I made ours. We built a good life, just the 2 of us." "He's an amazing kid. You've done an incredible job." "Thanks, though I can't take all the credit. He came out pretty amazing on his own."
Collins paused, then asked the question that had been on his mind. "What about you? Have you dated much since your accident?" Tiffany laughed, but it was tinged with bitterness. "Friday night was actually my first blind date in over a year.
I tried a few times before, but it always went the same way. Guys who seemed interested online would suddenly have emergencies when they saw the wheelchair, or they'd go through with the date but treat me like a charity case. Trevor was just the most honest about his disgust. That says everything about them and nothing about you, Colin said firmly. Maybe, but it's hard not to internalize it after a while, you know? You start to wonder if maybe they're right. If maybe you're asking too much to want someone to love you as you are. You're not asking too much. Colin's voice was steady, certain. You're asking for the bare minimum, to be seen and valued as a complete person. Anyone who can't do that doesn't deserve you. There was a long pause. You barely know me, Collins. How can you be so sure? Because I spend every day working with people who've been through what you've been through. I've seen the strength it takes to rebuild your life after everything changes in an instant. I've held the hands of patients who have sobbed about being rejected by people who claim to love them. And I've watched those same patients go on to live full, rich, meaningful lives. He meant every word. You're not defined by your wheelchair, Tiffany. You're defined by who you are. And from what I've seen, that's someone pretty remarkable. He could hear her soft breathing on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. Thank you. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. Their second date at the Seattle Art Museum set the tone for everything that followed. Levi had insisted on coming. He'd decided Tiffany was his friend, and he was very persistent about these things. The three of them spent the afternoon wandering through galleries. Levi provided running commentary on every sculpture, inventing elaborate backstories that made both adults laugh. When they reached a massive abstract piece made of twisted metal, Levi declared it a dinosaur doing yoga. Tiffany had laughed so hard she'd nearly fallen out of her chair. Collins had caught her, his hand steadying her shoulders. Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary. Their third date was dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant after Levi's bedtime. Collins's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had happily agreed to watch the boy for the evening. Without Levi as their buffer, the conversation went deeper. They talked about loneliness, about fear, about the constant work of rebuilding yourself when life breaks you down. The worst part isn't the physical limitations, Tiffany admitted. It's the way people see you, or don't see you. I became invisible in some ways. Men look through me now, not at me. I'm either a tragedy or inspiration porn, never just a woman. I see you, Colin said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Just you. A beautiful, intelligent, funny woman who I can't stop thinking about. That night, he kissed her for the first time in the parking lot. Her chair between them made the angle awkward until they both laughed and he knelt down to her level, cupping her face gently. Is this okay? He asked. More than okay, she whispered. Over the following months, they built something real and solid. Tiffany became a constant presence in their lives. She came to Levi's soccer games, adapted soccer, which she'd actually helped Collins find. She helped with homework, particularly art projects where her graphic design skills made her invaluable. She taught Collins how to cook actual meals. How did you survive this long anyway? She'd teased one evening, rescuing a burning pan. Takeout. Lots and lots of takeout. Collins learned about her world too. He went with her to the Adapted Sports Center, watching her swim with powerful arm strokes, her face transformed with joy in the water. He learned to navigate the city with wheelchair accessibility in mind, noticing for the first time how many barriers existed.
That restaurant has 3 steps at the entrance, Tiffany would point out. I'll need to use the back entrance through the alley. That's ridiculous, Collins had said. Why wouldn't they have a ramp? Welcome to my world. The next week, Collins wrote letters to 10 local businesses about accessibility. He couldn't change everything, but he could do something. There were hard moments. Nights when Tiffany's phantom pains were so severe she couldn't sleep, and Collins held her while she cried. Days when thoughtless strangers made comments or stared too long. Moments when Levi asked innocent questions about why Tiffany couldn't do certain things. But there were more good moments. Sunday mornings when Tiffany would come over and make pancakes while Levi set the table. Movie nights where they'd pile onto the couch debating whether dinosaurs or sharks were cooler. Quiet evenings after Levi was asleep when Collins and Tiffany would talk about their days, their dreams, their fears. "I love you," Collins told her for the first time on a random Tuesday evening in March, 4 months after that first dinner. They were washing dishes together, Levi already in bed, and it just slipped out. "I love you, Tiffany. I think I have since that first night when you sat down at our table and let Levi lecture you about pterosaurs instead of letting that awful man ruin your evening." Tiffany had frozen, her hands still in the sudsy water. Then she slowly turned to face him, her eyes shining.
"I love you too," she whispered. "Both of you. You made me believe again that I could be loved, really loved, exactly as I am. Not despite my wheelchair, not because of some fetish or savior complex, but just as me." "Always as you," Collins confirmed, kissing her softly. "Every single part of you." The next morning over breakfast, Levi looked up from his cereal and asked, "Is Tiffany going to be my mom?" Collins nearly choked on his coffee. "Buddy, that's a big question." "I hope so," Levi said simply. "I like her, and she likes us. Doesn't that make us a family?" Collins and Tiffany glanced at each other. It was a sunny afternoon in late April, almost a year after that fateful dinner at the Copper Kettle. Collins had been carrying the ring in his pocket for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. Levi had been absolutely terrible at keeping the secret. "Is today the day?" Levi would whisper dramatically every morning. "Are you going to ask her today?" "Patience, buddy." Finally, Collins decided. They drove to Discovery Park, one of Tiffany's favorite places in Seattle, with its winding, accessible trails and stunning views of Puget Sound. It was the kind of perfect spring day that Seattle rarely delivered. Warm sunshine, clear skies, the Sound sparkling like scattered diamonds.
They found their favorite spot, a clearing overlooking the water. Levi immediately ran off to investigate a tidal pool, giving Collins and Tiffany a moment of peace. "This is nice," Tiffany said, her face tilted up toward the sun. "I love it here." "Tiffany," Collins started. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. He knelt down beside her chair, taking her hand. "A year ago, I watched a man tell you that you weren't enough, that you were incomplete. And I've spent every day since then trying to show you how wrong he was." Tiffany's breath caught. Her eyes widened as she realized what was happening. "You're not incomplete. You're extraordinary. You're strong and funny and talented and kind. You've made Levi's life richer just by being in it. You've made my life richer. You've shown us both what real love looks like. Patient, accepting, genuine. Every single day I wake up grateful that I was in that restaurant that night. Grateful that I got to meet you." "Collins!" Tiffany whispered, tears already streaming down her face. "I don't want to spend another day without you being officially part of our family." He pulled the small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple, elegant ring with a single diamond. "Tiffany Williams, will you marry me?" "Yes!" Tiffany cried, not even hesitating. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes!" Collins slipped the ring onto her finger. Then she was pulling him up, her arms around his neck, kissing him while they both laughed and cried at the same time.
"Did she say yes?" Levi's voice called from the tidal pool. "Can I come back now?" "She said yes," Collins shouted back. Levi came running, whooping with joy, and threw himself at both of them with such enthusiasm that he nearly knocked Tiffany's chair backward. Collins caught them both.
The three of them stayed like that for a long moment, a tangle of arms and laughter and tears and joy. "We're a family now," Levi declared. "A real family!" "We always were, buddy," Tiffany said, kissing the top of his head. "We always were." They were married that summer in an intimate ceremony by the water at Golden Gardens Park. Tiffany wore a simple white dress, her long blonde hair adorned with a crown of wildflowers. Collins couldn't take his eyes off her as she wheeled down the aisle, her three brothers walking proudly beside her chair. Levi was the ring-bearer, taking his job with utmost seriousness, though he did stop halfway down the aisle to show a guest his dinosaur action figure. Collins's colleagues from the rehabilitation center attended, including several former patients who'd become close friends. Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Levi piped up with, "I object to waiting any longer. Can they kiss already?" The entire gathering erupted in laughter.
"I love you," Collins whispered as they were pronounced husband and wife, "my complete, perfect, extraordinary wife." "I love you too," Tiffany whispered back. "Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me." "Always," he promised. Later, during their first dance as a married couple, Collins held Tiffany's hands as she maneuvered her chair in slow circles. "I never thought I'd have this," Tiffany admitted quietly. "After my accident, I thought this kind of love was closed off to me. That night at the restaurant when Trevor said those things, I almost didn't go out with you because I thought you were just being nice, just pitying me." "And now?" Collins asked. "Now I know better. You loved me from the start. Not my wheelchair, not my story, but me, the woman I am. And you gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever, the belief that I deserved to be loved completely. You do," Collins said firmly. "You deserve everything good in this world." As the evening drew to a close, Collins stood to give a toast. "A year ago, I was in a restaurant with my son when we witnessed an act of cruelty. A man told the woman who is now my wife that she wasn't enough, that she was incomplete, that she wasn't worth his time." He paused, letting his gaze settle on Tiffany. "He was wrong about everything. Tiffany has shown me and Levi what it means to be truly whole. Not because of what you can or can't do physically, but because of who you are in your heart. She's made us better people just by being part of our lives." He raised his glass. "To my wife, who is complete, who is enough, who is everything. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for making us whole." "To Tiffany," the room chorused. 2 years after that Friday night at the Copper Kettle, the Dawson family had settled into a beautiful rhythm. They'd moved into a new house, one Collins and Tiffany had chosen together, with accessibility features built in from the start. Wide doorways, a roll-in shower, lowered countertops in Tiffany's home office where she ran her thriving graphic design business. Levi, now 9, had started a club at school called Ability Awareness, where he educated his classmates about disabilities and accessibility. Because everyone deserves to be included, he'd explained to his teacher. Collins still worked at the rehabilitation center. Tiffany sometimes came with him to talk to newly injured patients about life after disability. "I won't lie to you," she'd tell them. "Some days are hard. Some people will be cruel or thoughtless. You'll grieve the life you planned. But you'll also discover strength you didn't know you had. You'll learn who really matters in your life. And if you're lucky, if you're as lucky as I was, you'll find people who see you, really see you, and love every part of who you are." On a Saturday morning in late spring, Collins woke to find Levi and Tiffany already in the kitchen. She was in her chair at the stove, teaching Levi how to flip pancakes while he stood on his step stool beside her. "No, like this," Tiffany was saying, demonstrating the wrist flick. "See? It's all in the technique." Levi tried. The pancake landed half on the pan, half on the counter. They both dissolved into giggles. Collins leaned against the doorframe, watching his family, and felt a wave of gratitude so profound it nearly brought tears to his eyes. This chaotic, loving, imperfect, beautiful life was everything. "Dad!" Levi spotted him. "Come help! Tiffany's teaching me to make dinosaur-shaped pancakes." "Those look more like blobs," Collins teased, walking over to kiss his wife good morning. "They're abstract dinosaurs," Tiffany defended, grinning up at him. "Very modern, very artistic." As they ate breakfast together, slightly burnt, very abstract dinosaur pancakes, Collins thought back to that Friday night at the Copper Kettle. One moment. One choice. It had changed everything. They were a family. They were complete. They were home. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please don't let it end here. Let it remind you kindness still matters, compassion still changes lives, and hope is never wasted. Subscribe and be part of our Soul Lift Stories family, where every story lifts the spirit and reminds us that light always finds its way back. And if this moment moved you, share it.
The millionaire's son screamed at every nanny, but smiled at this maid. The Harrington mansion stood still on a foggy hill overlooking the San Francisco Bay. From a distance, it looked perfect. Glass walls reflecting the pale gray sky, a garden so precisely trimmed that even the roses seemed afraid to grow out of line. Yet inside, beneath the silence, a piercing sound tore through the air. The cry of a child. For 2 years, 17 nannies had entered through that front door, and every one of them had left. The last one, Emily Price, was trembling as she packed her suitcase in the grand hallway. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I just can't do this anymore." From the marble staircase, Evelyn Harrington stood tall, silver hair in a perfect bun, posture unbending, eyes cold and sharp. "As always," she said, "no one these days has the patience to raise a child." Upstairs, 2-year-old Duncan Harrington was still screaming. The sound bounced off the walls and ceiling, occasionally broken by the thud of toys hitting the crib. Each sound was a desperate attempt to communicate, though no one understood. To Evelyn, it was just misbehavior. To Emily, it was the edge of sanity. But to Carolyn Torres, the quiet housekeeper downstairs, it was something else entirely. She stopped mopping and looked up toward the ceiling where the cries vibrated through the beams. In 6 months of working there, she had heard that sound hundreds of times, and each one made her chest tighten. It wasn't the noise, it was the memory it carried. It was the same sound her son, Gabriel, used to make before he died. Carolyn closed her eyes and took a shaky breath, but the images flooded back. The sterile hospital lights, the cold beeping machines, the tiny hands clutching her shirt until they fell still. She gripped the mop harder, forcing herself back to the present. Emily came rushing down the stairs, eyes swollen with tears. "Carolyn," she said shakily, "that boy, he's not like any child I've ever met. I think he's in pain, but no one listens." She turned and hurried out. The heavy door slammed behind her, echoing through the hall like a final verdict. Evelyn remained on the stairs, arms crossed, her voice sharp and cutting. Pathetic, a 2-year-old making grown women cry. Carolyn said nothing. She lowered her head, wiping the floor again as silent tears fell, blending into the soapy water. Upstairs, Duncan's cries continued, hoarse, weary, and fading into something too deep to name. The house was beautiful, but hollow. Every polished wall, every white curtain, every immaculate surface seemed drenched in loneliness. And amid that emptiness, there was someone who truly heard. A woman who had once lost everything, whose heart now began to beat again, in sync with the silent plea of a child, whispering through his sobs, "Please help me." That night, when the house had finally sunk into silence, Carol Torres still couldn't sleep. She sat by the small window of the maid's room, gazing out into the dim garden below. The yellow lamplight spilled across the glass, reflecting the weary, sorrowful face of a woman who had survived only by routine. Upstairs, Duncan's faint sobs broke the stillness now and then, a small crack in the calm of the night. That fragile sound pulled her back to the place she never wanted to return, 10 years ago. Back then, they lived in a small apartment in Los Angeles. Carolyn worked as a waitress, and her husband, Carlos, was a construction worker. Life was simple, but full of laughter, until Gabriel began having strange fits of crying. At first, it was just a few tears when the lights were too bright, or when a car horn blared outside, or when someone touched him unexpectedly. But soon, those small cries turned into real panic attacks. Gabriel would tremble, convulse, and bang his head against his mother's shoulder as if trying to escape a world that was too loud. Carolyn held him close, whispering through trembling breath, "Mommy's here, my love." She took him from doctor to doctor. They all said the same thing, as if reading from the same script. "You're spoiling him. All kids cry." Carlos began to change. He grew quiet, came home late, drank more, and one day he left. The last words he said before walking out were, "You made him weak, Carolyn. You broke him." The small room suddenly felt impossibly vast. Every night, Carolyn held Gabriel through endless tears, praying that morning would bring a miracle. She took him to hospitals again and again, begging in desperation, "Please, something's wrong with my son." But the shaking heads, the tired smiles, the hollow words of comfort slowly extinguished her faith. Then came one December night, rain pouring hard, thunder ripping through the sky. Gabriel suffered his worst episode yet. He screamed, clawed at his face, and hit his head on the crib until it bled. Carolyn clutched him and ran into the storm, clothes drenched, hands trembling. At the hospital, a young doctor took Gabriel from her arms. He froze, eyes wide, and whispered, "This boy isn't throwing tantrums. His brain overreacts to sound and light. It might be sensory disorder." Carolyn broke down in tears. After all those years, someone finally believed her. But it was too late. Gabriel had developed a severe infection, masked by the sensory symptoms. 3 days later, he left the world in his mother's arms, the woman who never stopped believing her child wasn't broken, only different. When Carolyn came to work at the Harrington mansion, she had no idea fate was leading her right back to the place she had fled. For the first 6 months, she tried to keep her distance. But each time she heard Duncan cry, her heart ached, and Gabriel's image returned, the little boy with deep brown eyes who cried until he had no strength left. Now, in the quiet of the night, Carolyn sat on the edge of her bed, gripping the locket with Gabriel's picture inside. She whispered, "My love, my son, if your soul still lingers, help me not be afraid. Help me save that boy." A soft breeze stirred the curtain, tilting the golden light. Carolyn took a deep breath, feeling something small yet powerful brush against her heart. She stood up and looked toward the ceiling, toward where Duncan slept after his long crying spell. Her gaze softened, and for the first time in years, she smiled, a painful but determined smile. The next morning, sunlight shimmered on the surface of the water, reflecting against the glass walls of the house like a giant mirror. But no matter how bright the sun shone, inside that house, the air remained as cold as ice. Evelyn Harrington, 63 years old, always began her day precisely at 6 o'clock in the morning. She wore a dark blue wool dress, tied her hair neatly into a bun, and descended the staircase with the steady sound of her heels clicking against the wooden floor. Everything in the house followed her rhythm. Breakfast at 7, cleaning at 8, absolute silence after 9. For Evelyn, Order was the only way to keep a family standing. On the living room wall hung dozens of awards and photographs of her son, Richard Harrington, founder of one of the largest real estate companies in the state. In those pictures, Richard smiled brightly, shaking hands with partners, cutting ribbons at grand openings. But that smile no longer existed in real life. Richard usually left home at 6 in the morning and returned after 10 at night. Work, projects, contracts. He buried himself in them like a man running from his own pain. Ever since his wife Anna had died from postnatal complications, Richard had not been the same. He refused to say her name, refused to speak of the loss, and never entered the room where she had once lain. Evelyn believed that time would heal everything. But the only thing time had done was turn the house into a sealed box filled with weary souls. Duncan, Richard's little boy, was the one who bore it all. At 2 years old, he lived surrounded by silence, by the dry echo of footsteps, and by sharp, emotionless commands. "Don't cry," she said. "Don't dirty your clothes," she said. "You don't need hugs," she said. But what she didn't know was that each command made the boy shrink a little more inside. In the kitchen, Carol worked quietly, washing each plate under the steady sound of running water. She had been working there for 6 months and had yet to hear a single thank you from anyone in the family. Sometimes, when passing through the hallway, she saw her employer, Richard, sitting in his office under the dim yellow light, his head resting in his hands. On the desk lay a small photo of Anna and newborn Duncan. He would stare at it for a long time, then put it away in a drawer, as if hiding his grief from the world. Evelyn, however, was different. She didn't believe in tears. "My son is successful because I was strict," she often said. "If I had been soft, he would never have become who he is today." But Richard no longer believed those words. He just didn't know how to change. That evening, as Carol was wiping the dining table, Evelyn called her over. "Tomorrow, the new nanny will arrive. I hope she isn't as weak as the others," Evelyn said coldly. "Yes, ma'am," Carolyn replied softly. Mrs. Evelyn glanced at her with icy eyes. "Do not interfere with the child's upbringing. You're here to keep things clean. Understood?" Carolyn nodded, though a wave of bitterness rose inside her. She had heard Duncan crying all day, a cry identical to Gabriel's years ago. And what frightened her most wasn't the crying, but the silence that followed. The kind of silence that meant a child had stopped calling for help because he already knew no one would answer. That night, the house was once again eerily quiet. Richard stayed in his office. Evelyn sat reading in her chair. Carolyn cleaned under the dim light. Upstairs, Duncan no longer cried. Carolyn lifted her head, listening. For a moment, she caught a tiny sound, a weak, trembling breath. She whispered softly, as if making a promise to herself. "Tomorrow, if no one listens to that boy, I will." The next morning, fog still blanketed the hill. From the kitchen window, Carol Torres watched as a silver car stopped in front of the mansion gate. A young woman stepped out, pulling a small suitcase and a fabric bag full of colorful toys. "That must be her," Carolyn whispered. The gate opened automatically, and Evelyn Harrington was already standing in the doorway, composed yet cold. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrington," the young woman said cheerfully. "I'm Nadia Jenkins from Bright Care Agency. I'm here to take care of Duncan." Evelyn's eyes scanned her from head to toe. Sneakers, a ponytail, that open smile. "I hope you're not under the impression that this job will be easy," she said in her clipped, steady tone. 17 nannies before you couldn't last 3 weeks. Nadia's smile didn't fade. "I understand, ma'am. I've worked with children who have special needs before. Every child is a world of their own, and I'd love to get to know Duncan's world." A flicker of irritation crossed Evelyn's face. "Here, we believe in discipline and structure. No talk of special worlds. Children must learn to obey. Carolyn, polishing the table nearby, froze for a second. The air felt tight, charged, but Nadia stood calmly. "I respect your approach," she said softly, "but I also believe that sometimes a child needs to be understood before they can be taught." Evelyn pressed her lips together. "We'll see if you still think that in a few days." They walked down the hallway and climbed the stairs. Carolyn followed quietly, pretending to work just to listen. "This is Duncan's room," Evelyn said, opening the door. The room was flooded with cold white light, spotless, almost sterile. In the corner, the little boy sat in his crib, clutching a worn-out stuffed animal, his face pale and distant. "Hi there," Nadia said gently, kneeling down to his level. "I'm Nadia." Duncan looked at her for a few seconds, said nothing, then turned away. "It's best if you don't talk too much," Evelyn interjected. "He doesn't like attention." But Nadia only smiled. "That's all right. I've got time." She set her bag down, pulled out a small yellow ball, and rolled it gently toward him. The ball touched Duncan's foot and stopped. He didn't move at first, then slowly reached out and tapped it with one tiny finger. Carolyn, standing in the doorway, held her breath. It was just a small gesture, but it was enough to make her heart stir. In that brief moment, the harsh light softened, and the cold house seemed to warm by a single degree. Evelyn crossed her arms, displeased, and turned away. "Do your job," she said sharply. Carolyn watched her leave, then looked back at Nadia and Duncan. No one else in that house noticed, but something had shifted. Small, fragile, almost invisible. Yet it might just be the beginning of everything. That afternoon, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting long stripes across the living room floor. Evelyn Harrington sat upright in her armchair, a leather notebook perfectly balanced on her lap. Across from her, Nadia Jenkins sat with her own small pad, ready to take notes. "Before we begin," Evelyn said in her precise, clipped tone, "there are a few house rules you need to understand." "Yes, ma'am," Nadia replied politely, her smile steady but slightly strained. "Rule number 1, Evelyn lifted a finger. No unnecessary holding or hugging. I don't believe in comforting. A child must learn self-control early." Nadia paused her pen. "Ma'am, Duncan is only 2 years old. At that age, physical affection is an important part of emotional development." Evelyn interrupted, her voice sharp as glass. "I don't need you to teach me how to raise children. My son was raised this way, and he's one of the most successful men I know." Nadia looked up, her eyes calm, only a trace of sadness flickering there. "He may be successful," she said softly, "but does that mean he's happy?" The room froze. Carolyn, dusting the bookshelf nearby, felt her heart stop for a second. Evelyn's brow tightened. She slammed the notebook shut. "I didn't hire you to philosophize. Keep writing." "Rule number 2, she continued, voice growing sharper. "Duncan eats at fixed times, 8, 12, and 6. Not earlier, not later. If he's hungry outside those hours, he must learn to wait. The world doesn't revolve around a child." Nadia wrote slowly. "Understood, ma'am." "Rule number 3, Evelyn went on. "No colorful or noisy toys. I won't have my home turned into a circus. Simplicity builds focus." Nadia glanced at her bag of toys, bright rubber balls, painted wooden blocks. And for a second, her hands trembled. Then she smiled faintly. "I'll do my best, ma'am." Evelyn gave a curt nod, the faint smile of someone who believes she has won. "Good. I hope you'll last longer than the others. None made it past 3 days." Nadia looked her straight in the eye. "I'm not leaving. I came here for Duncan." Evelyn arched an eyebrow, unconvinced, and rose to her feet. "We'll see how long that promise lasts." She walked away, leaving behind the faint, sharp scent of perfume. Carolyn turned toward Nadia, eyes full of something between worry and admiration. "Are you sure you can handle this?" she asked quietly, once Evelyn was gone. Nadia smiled, a gentle but determined smile. "I've met many children like Duncan, but I've never met anyone quite like her." Both women laughed softly, a brief spark of warmth inside a house still heavy with silence. Carolyn picked up her cloth again, returning to her work, but inside her chest stirred something unfamiliar. Fear mixed with hope. She knew Evelyn's rules were only the surface, a disguise for pain long buried, wrapped in control. By noon the next day, the dining room was blazing with light. The white crystal chandelier poured its glow directly onto the table, bouncing off the glassware until the entire space seemed to burn in a dazzling glare. At the head of the table sat Evelyn Harrington, her posture rigid, fingers interlocked. Across from her, Nadia Jenkins, the 18th nanny, carefully placed a bowl of pumpkin soup in front of Duncan. "This is your favorite, Duncan," Nadia said softly, trying to keep her voice gentle. "I made it just the way your mother used to." Duncan looked at the bowl, his eyes wide. He didn't touch the spoon. The brightness of the light made him squint, then whimper softly as his tiny hands moved up to cover his ears. Evelyn frowned, displeased. "Duncan, eat. Stop this nonsense," she said coldly. "Ma'am?" Nadia murmured. "The light might be bothering him, I think." "Don't think," Evelyn snapped, tapping her fingers sharply on the table. "I told you, you spoil him too much. A child must learn to endure." From the adjoining kitchen, Carolyn Torres was stacking plates, hearing every word. Evelyn's icy tone mingled with the dry clinking of silver against porcelain. Carolyn froze, listening. Then a scream tore through the air. Duncan shrieked, the sound sharp as glass. Nadia jumped, dropping the spoon. "It's okay, Duncan. It's just the light," she said quickly. "I'll dim it, all right?" "No," Evelyn barked, slamming her hand on the table. The sound made Duncan flinch, his body trembling, tears spilling down his cheeks. "Sit still! Stop pretending!" Duncan cried harder, scratching his own face until red streaks appeared on his delicate skin. Nadia panicked, rising from her chair. "Mrs. Harrington, please, let me comfort him." "No," Evelyn cut her off, her voice like iron. "Let him cry until he's tired. If you pick him up, he'll learn to manipulate you." The crying filled the room, chaotic, raw, unbearable. Each sob from Duncan felt like a knife twisting in Carolyn's chest. She took a step back, hand over her heart, pulse pounding. She had heard this sound before. Gabriel, her son, used to cry just like that, helpless, desperate, unbelieved. Unable to bear it any longer, Carolyn dropped the stack of dishes and ran out of the kitchen. The crash of porcelain shattered through the air. Evelyn turned sharply, fury in her eyes. "What do you think you're doing, Carolyn?" she snapped. "Get back to the kitchen this instant." Carolyn didn't answer. She had seen Duncan, and for a heartbeat, the blood in her veins seemed to stop. The little boy was strapped tightly into his high chair. His face was flushed crimson, tears mixed with blood from the scratches on his cheeks. His body trembled violently, small hands jerking uncontrollably. Nadia stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Harrington, please," Nadia pleaded. "He can't take this anymore. You're hurting him." Evelyn pointed a rigid finger at her. "Be quiet. Touch him, and you're fired immediately." "Duncan isn't pretending," Carolyn said, her voice low and trembling, but firm. "He's in real pain. Look at him, ma'am." "You have no right to interfere." Evelyn advanced toward her, eyes blazing. "You're just a cleaner, not a doctor, not his mother." Carolyn didn't back down. She rushed to Duncan's side, bending over him, her hands shaking as she unbuckled the strap. "It's okay, Duncan," she whispered. "I'm here. Breathe, sweetheart." "Stop!" Evelyn shouted, but Nadia stepped between them. "Please, Mrs. Harrington," she cried, "don't hurt him any more." Carolyn freed the boy. Duncan collapsed into her arms, his small body limp, breaths broken and shallow. He trembled like a frightened bird. Carolyn held him close, one hand gently rubbing his back, her voice soft and rhythmic as a lullaby. "Shh. Breathe, my love. Slowly now. I'm here." The screams still echoed, shorter now, broken by sobs. The small body in Carolyn's arms began to ease, the violent tremors fading into faint shivers. Carolyn closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and did what her instincts told her to do. She gently tossed Duncan into the air, not high, just enough for him to feel the motion, and caught him securely in her hands. Once, twice, 3 times. Evelyn shouted, "You've lost your mind. Stop this at once." But Nadia grabbed her arm, shaking her head, her voice trembling. "Look, Mrs. Harrington, look at his face." Duncan was no longer crying. He was breathing hard, his wide eyes fixed on Carolyn, and for the first time in hours, that gaze wasn't filled with fear. It was wonder. Carolyn lifted him again, steady, safe, gentle. And then, like a small miracle in the middle of the storm, Duncan laughed. The sound was clear, raspy, but real. A short, pure burst of joy that filled the air. Evelyn's mouth fell open. Nadia covered her face with her hands, sobbing softly. Carolyn froze, tears spilling down her cheeks. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Duncan, the child who had known only fear and tears, was laughing. He tilted his head back, waiting for her to toss him again. Tiny hands reaching upward, lips curved into a radiant smile. Again, Carolyn heard him whisper through his breath. She obeyed, lifting him once more. Lighter this time. He laughed again, louder, longer. Duncan's laughter filled the room, echoing off the cold walls, cutting through the heavy air, rising into the bright white light above. Evelyn trembled, her voice cracking as she stammered. How did it stop? How can he laugh?" Carolyn held Duncan close, her voice calm but heavy with emotion. Because he was never misbehaving. His brain was overloaded. The light, the sounds, the smells, they all attacked him at once. His body couldn't take it. She looked directly into Evelyn's eyes, her tone both tender and resolute. Children like him don't need to be disciplined. They need to be understood. This motion, it helps his body reorganize what's inside, find order again in the chaos the world forces on him. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The air was so still that only Duncan's faint breathing could be heard, mingled with Nadia's quiet sobs. Even the light above seemed softer now, no longer blinding. Evelyn took a step back, her eyes still locked on her grandson. For the first time, her gaze was not stern, but uncertain, trembling. Carolyn bent down and pressed a gentle kiss to Duncan's forehead. He rested his head on her shoulder, eyes closed, a small smile still on his lips. And in that stillness, a miracle had happened. The sound of laughter faded, dissolving into the stillness of the room. Carolyn was still holding Duncan in her arms, his face glowing with joy, while her eyes shimmered with tears. Nadia stood beside her, hand over her mouth, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. Evelyn Harrington slowly stepped back, her lips trembling, no words coming out. And then the front door swung open. A man's voice echoed, rough but steady. "Mother, what's going on here?" Everyone turned. Richard Harrington, in a gray suit, stood at the doorway, his face weary from a long day, but his eyes widened in disbelief at the sight before him. Carolyn stood in the middle of the room, holding Duncan, the boy no one had been able to soothe for months, now laughing, resting his head on her shoulder, completely at peace. Richard took a slow step forward, his voice softening. "Duncan, are you laughing?" Duncan turned, his eyes bright. "Daddy!" he cried out, his voice trembling but full of joy. "Daddy, fly!" In that instant, Richard froze. He looked at Carolyn, the woman he knew only as the cleaning lady, and saw something in her eyes that made his heart tighten, the gentleness of a mother and the deep sorrow of someone who had once lost everything. Evelyn spoke, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Richard, she threw him in the air. She's insane." But Richard didn't hear her. His gaze was fixed on Duncan, the little boy laughing for the first time since his mother's death. He stepped closer. "Son." Duncan reached out his arms toward him, still smiling. Carolyn gently placed the boy into his father's arms and whispered, "Hold him tight. He needs to feel safe." Richard's hands trembled as he held his son. Duncan rested his head against his chest. Evelyn stood frozen, her face pale. The room fell silent, only the sound of father and son breathing in unison. After a few moments, Richard looked up at Carolyn. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice breaking. Carolyn replied softly, "There's no magic, sir. I just listen to him. He's not difficult. He just can't express what he feels. His body's been crying for help," Nadia added, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Evelyn didn't understand, but Miss Carolyn saved him. Richard said nothing. He looked down at his son, peaceful, eyes closed, a calm expression he hadn't seen in years. He held the boy tighter and whispered, "Thank you." Carolyn shook her head gently. "I didn't do anything. Duncan fought for himself. I only gave him a little space to find his way back." Evelyn turned away, her voice faint. "You don't understand, Richard. Your son needs discipline, not—" "No, Mother," Richard interrupted firmly, his voice filled with emotion. "My son needs love." Carolyn bent down, placed a hand on Duncan's shoulder, and whispered, "You're so strong, Duncan. You did it." The boy smiled in his sleep, his tiny hand still clutching his father's shirt. For the first time in years, the house was silent. But it was a peaceful silence, not a heavy one. Through the window, the afternoon sun spilled in, glinting off the tear that shimmered on Carolyn's face. Evelyn quietly left the room without another word. Richard remained there, holding his son, watching Carolyn, the woman who had done what the world could not. And deep inside, he knew, from this moment on, everything had changed forever. A week after that fateful afternoon, the mansion on the hill was no longer filled with cries or angry voices. Instead, it echoed with the gentle sound of wind brushing through the curtains and the soft melody of piano music every morning. Everything began to change, not loudly, not dramatically, but slowly, like dawn breaking after a stormy night. Richard Harrington had called in a renowned sensory therapy specialist from the city. The man listened carefully as Carolyn described Duncan's crisis, how he reacted to light, sound, and smells. After a moment of silence, he finally said, "She's right. The boy suffers from severe sensory processing disorder. But what's remarkable is that someone finally listened to him." Richard turned to Carolyn, his voice sincere. "You're not leaving, Carolyn. From now on, you're Duncan's primary caregiver. No one understands my son the way you do." At that moment, Nadia Jenkins stood quietly in the corner, her eyes glistening with tears. She smiled, trying to hide her emotion. "Mr. Harrington," she said softly, "I think it's time for me to go." Both Richard and Carolyn turned to her. "You don't have to," Carolyn said quickly. "Duncan likes you." Nadia shook her head, smiling sadly. "No, Carolyn, Duncan needs you. When he looks at you, there's peace in his eyes, a kind of calm I've never seen before. I came here to help, but you're the one who saved his soul." Richard stepped forward, grasping her hand with gratitude. "Thank you, Nadia. The next day, Nadia left the mansion. Carolyn stood at the gate to see her off. They hugged tightly. "Keep in touch," Carolyn whispered. "Of course," Nadia replied. From that day on, the house began to change. The dining room lights were replaced with soft golden ones, and the curtains thickened to shield harsh sunlight. Sharp sounds disappeared, replaced by gentle piano tunes in the mornings. The smell of bleach was gone. Only the faint scent of lavender lingered in the hallways. Duncan was the first to change. He began to sleep better. The panic attacks came less often. Every morning, Carolyn found him sitting on the carpet, lining up wooden blocks, quietly humming along to the music. Richard often stood by the doorway, watching silently. He didn't say anything, just smiled, a rare smile after so many years. And Evelyn Harrington, who had once believed in absolute discipline, now had to relearn the simplest thing of all, how to hold her grandson. At first she was awkward, stiff, afraid of frightening Duncan. But Carolyn patiently guided her, step by step. "Don't be afraid. Just hold him with your heart. You don't need to say anything. Just let him feel that you're here." One morning, Duncan ran up to her, arms outstretched. "Grandma, I want a hug." Evelyn froze. She looked at Carolyn, then slowly bent down and wrapped her arms around him. Duncan giggled, resting his head against her chest. Evelyn trembled, and for the first time in years, a tear rolled down her cheek onto the child's shoulder. From that day, she stopped giving orders. She began to ask instead, "Duncan, what would you like today?" And when he spoke, she listened, truly listened. Meanwhile, the bond between Carolyn and Richard grew stronger, wordlessly, naturally. He started coming home earlier each day. They would sit on the floor together with Duncan, teaching him to name emotions: sad, happy, scared, joyful. Sometimes their eyes met, just for a moment, but it was enough for both to understand that the loneliness inside them was no longer theirs alone. One late evening, after tucking Duncan into bed, Richard found Carolyn folding blankets in the living room. "Thank you," he said quietly, "not just for my son, but for bringing life back to this house." Carolyn smiled softly. "I only cleaned something else, not the floors, but the heart." They looked at each other, their eyes filled with gratitude and a glimmer of hope. One afternoon, as the sunset bathed the garden in gold, Evelyn stepped onto the porch where Carolyn was watering the plants. She stood there for a long moment before speaking softly. "Carolyn." Carolyn turned, gentle as ever. "Yes, ma'am?" Evelyn took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I was wrong." Carolyn said nothing. Evelyn continued. "I thought love had to be strict, bound by rules, but it turns out it only needs to listen." Carolyn walked closer, taking her hand gently. "We've all been wrong before, ma'am. What matters is that now Duncan has a grandmother who knows how to love him the right way." Evelyn smiled weakly, another tear falling. In the glow of the evening light, the two women stood side by side, from two different worlds, yet both finally healing together. More than a year had passed since the day everything began to change. The Harrington house was now filled with light and laughter. Beneath the rose arbor, Carolyn sat reading, the scent of blossoms curling around her like a soft ribbon of perfume. In the middle of the garden, Duncan ran barefoot, chasing butterflies, while Richard came out carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. He set one down in front of her and took a seat beside her. A gentle breeze brushed past. The roses swayed. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across their hands, warm and tender. From the middle of the garden, Duncan came running toward them, arms wide open. "Mommy, Daddy, I really flew!" Carolyn laughed, gathering the boy into her arms. In the golden bloom of the garden, the 3 of them stood close together. No past, no pain anymore, only love, simple and complete.